Book 5 Chapter 15. It was harder to kill him than the first two because I saw his face and I had spoken to him. I truly had difficulty attacking him. He was a portly old man. He held in his hands the sawed-off shotgun from his shop. Its drop, the hidden barrel, was intact, though it wasn't active because his gun wasn't hidden, thankfully. Still, he looked the most human out of all the patchers we had seen since they went hive-mind. He looked scared. Then he spoke and said, "In family we find purpose," speaking with 100 voices all at once, like he was possessed. His face went blank, and he lifted his shotgun at me while his mouth continued to chant. That made it a lot easier, actually. He fired the shotgun at me, but I dodged to the left and ran into a patch of trees near the road. I expected to get peppered with lead. After all, that was what a sawed-off shotgun was for. Luckily, I was too far away for him to hit me. I also suspected he was using slugs as ammunition instead of something that would spread when shot, because a huge hole appeared in a tree behind me as I fled into the woods. I felt it was a poor choice, but I wasn't going to argue. He started to reload. The drop that made bladed weapons equal to guns was very ambiguous about how it would work, but I suspected things like decreasing bullets' accuracy and making guns have to reload more often were part of it. Those little tweaks allowed a man wearing an oversized suit and holding hedge shears to beat a possessed man with a shotgun. It didn't hurt that his plot armor was only 8. I closed the distance, and as I removed him from the picture, his eyes began to glow. I hadn't seen the others do that because I hadn't seen them up close when they died. Perhaps Carousel wanted to confirm for the audience that these enemies were not exactly human. Typically, that would be done by showing how evil they were, but Corduroy hadn't done much evil stuff. The 100 voices in his mouth did not stop talking after he died, not for several minutes. His mouth wasn't even moving, and the sounds came out. Creepy. I wondered if there was a non-supernatural version of the storyline buried inside the story where the patchers were just normal people. I grabbed his shotgun. I was really making a killing here with the drop weapons. A sawed-off shotgun, hedging shears. I was starting quite the collection. I ran over to the garage after I saw there were no more patchers around. I knocked on the garage door so they would know it was me. They opened it, restarted the car, and they were off, leaving me behind. The wind howled, and I stared out across the fields as people with glowing eyes began exiting the forest. "They're here!" I yelled back into the garage as I shut the door. I wanted them to think Kimberly and the others were inside. How long the deception would last wasn't important. I assumed that the deception would work because Rose and I were here, and we had the lowest plot armor of anyone being targeted. The deception gave cover to explain why we were being attacked and the others weren't. At least they weren't being attacked by these patchers. They likely had their own problems to deal with. Once the others left this scene, Carousel would have a challenge ready for them. The deception worked, too. We were getting good at this game. Now, I had 50 or so armed attackers coming straight for me. What a great plan I had made. I went off-screen soon after Kimberly and the others left. I was off-screen for quite a while. Kimberly recording her report on everything that had happened was clearly more important than what was happening to me. I imagined they were dodging enemies as she recorded things. The patchers just stood and watched from a distance. Usually, enemies will attack you when you're off-screen, just not with much enthusiasm, especially if you're an important character. With what I had planned, it was obvious that Carousel wanted to make sure that my fate was captured in its entirety. I remembered back to when we were scouting the storyline out. Cassie had used her drop to try to find out the supernatural nature of the story. She spoke of an angry entity upset over blood being spilled. A child of the earth had been killed. At first, I thought that might have been Tamaracano, but as I learned about Russell and eventually saw him gunned down, I realized it must be him. The ancient spirits that had given him life, that had answered Rose Harlow's prayer, were now angry that he had been killed. I was going to give voice to that anger. I had equipped my raised by television drop. When I stayed behind to let the others escape, it activated, and as I had hoped, it buffed my moxie by 5 points. It gave a bit of metal, too. No grit though. Moxie and metal. Moxie was used to interact with the supernatural and spiritual. It was also used for improvisation. I needed it for both. I couldn't say what was about to happen or whether I would live, but if I was right, this would be a great conclusion for my character. Of course, I really did hope that I would survive. It would be a bit embarrassing to die grocery shopping. I knew things were about to start happening as Rose slowly limped out of the garage and joined me in the field as I stared at the Patchers. We were off-screen, but she said, if I had known all of this would happen, I wonder if I would have prayed for a child. You couldn't have known, I said. If it wasn't for them, things would have turned out fine. She didn't look as confident. You can never be surprised by what you get when you pray to a nameless thing, whether you're praying for a child or for a second chance. A person willing to do that doesn't deserve to plead ignorance. I did what I did, and now we're here. Now we're here, I repeated, staring at her, unsure of the full scope of what she was saying. I didn't have time to think about it. On screen. Come to us, the Patchers all spoke at once. Hundreds of voices sounding out of dozens of mouths. Come to us. We will make it quick. I had to wonder if a scholar or an occultist had done this story, would we have learned more about the Patchers and their supernatural nature? I supposed we could figure that out the next time we went food shopping. If they were going to yell at me, I was going to yell back. It was showtime. You shouldn't have come here, I screamed. We have been here since the first war, the voices said, and we will be here at the last one. I didn't know the history they were referencing, but it was a cool line, I thought. There were those that were here before you, I screamed, and they're angry. I got no response, but I noticed Merle Patcher had moved into the forefront of the group that was closing the distance toward me. That gave me confidence in my plan. It was nice to see the main Patcher. We will do whatever it takes to protect our family, he said, except he didn't say it with 100 voices like the others. He was just chucking himself. His eyes were glowing, though. His plot armor was 28. He was the boss. Or so he thought. The wind started to howl even harder, and Patchers emerged from the woods holding torches, which they promptly used to catch the crops on fire. You really shouldn't have done that, I said. I tried to look panicked, afraid not of the Patchers but of the thing that they were insulting. Rose started to call out, trees, sky, earth, hear me. These people have killed your child. They killed the child you gave me to protect. Please, she said, I implore you, let loose your vengeance on them. Thunder boomed with no lighting. You should go. I screamed. Something is happening. I tried to play it like I was so panicked that I just wanted it all to stop. I even shed a tear, though that could have been from the wind whipping my eyes. Merle was unfazed. We will do whatever it takes to protect our family name, he said. He lifted his gun and shot Rose. She fell to the ground. This wound was fatal. You really shouldn't have done that, I said. You already killed his father, and then you killed him. Now that you killed his mother, he's really going to be angry. 50 heads tilted in confusion. I don't think so, Merle said. They lifted their firearms. I hoisted my reacquired scythe up and ran as they started to shoot at me. Sure enough, the bullets whizzed past but never hit me. I ran into the nearest field of corn. It was on fire, but I wasn't going to let that stop me. There was plenty of room to hide there, and the fire wouldn't get to me for some time. They followed me into the corn. The first one I saw, I swiped it with the scythe. I wasn't sure if the scythe was a good weapon in real life, but in this movie, heads rolled. Literally. There was a pitter-patter as corn fell to the ground, followed by a thud after my swing. I continued running and swiping and dodging for a long while as the fire spread. Even with the buff to metal from Raised by Television, I wasn't a combat build. Some of the Patchers were too tanky to be killed in one blow. With a scythe, you either kill in one hit or you don't kill. It was too awkward as a weapon if you just got it hooked on a Patcher's overall strap. That was my strategy. If I saw a low-level one, I swiped. They might die, they might run, but they were no longer a threat. When I killed them, They still had glowing eyes and talking mouths. I ran through the corn in a panic. The world was closing in on me. I tried running along the field to escape the fire, but a large patcher stood in my way, and when I instinctively swung the scythe, he caught it. That was the end of that weapon. I ran out of the corn and back into the main clearing. I could still feel the fire on my skin. The smoke filled my nostrils. I was out of room to run. The fire ate away at the entire crop. As soon as I got out, I felt something stinging my shoulder. I had been shot. Perhaps the ride was over. I really was hoping for something more than a few good shots of me taking out patchers. They were closing in now, and I watched the plot cycle. It wasn't moving. We were still firmly in the final battle. I hoped that Kimberly and the others were well on their way to Carousel. I didn't have to kill these people. I didn't even have to survive. I did have a show to put on, however, because I was the distraction. I doubled over like I was sick to my stomach. The stinging bullet hole in my shoulder was only a mild annoyance as my plan started to come to fruition. I puked on the ground. I felt something in the wind, something that felt like battery acid on my skin. The red wallpaper showed my status changing to infected. So that was how it was going to play out. "They won't have any mercy on you," I said, though I struggled to speak. After that, I didn't have control of my mouth. A wicked voice came out of my throat that didn't sound human. "You killed him," the voice accused. "You spilled his blood on this land," it continued. "Your blood will be spilled for it." Merle lifted his gun to shoot at me, and when he pulled the trigger, at first, I thought that it had misfired. He was only 10 feet away, so that didn't make a lot of sense, but I heard a bang, and I felt nothing. It was only a moment later that I realized that my grit was over 30. Grit wasn't even supposed to make you bulletproof, but then I wasn't exactly human. I was a vessel, and while I didn't have the presence of mind to read all of the new tropes I had on the red wallpaper, I could see that there were dozens of them. A higher power possessed me, and mere guns could not stop me. The other patchers started to fire into me, and their bullets pierced right through my suit but bounced off my skin. My hand moved to the sky, and my scythe, which had been taken from me in the corn, flew into my hand. "The harvest is nigh," I said in the voice of that terrible entity. "The grain is ripe, and the reaper awaits." Was I the reaper? No. Apparently not. The reaper flew in from above the trees in the distance. As my eyes looked in that direction, I could see that Benny, the haunted scarecrow, had arrived. He was more ragged than I recognized. Bullet holes and blood were still there. The legs of his coveralls were not tied, so the straw stuffing continued to fall out, though it never seemed to deplete his size. Benny flew over the fields. "He seeks his revenge," I said in the voice of the terrible god. And he got his revenge. Benny was a quick and efficient killer, with his sickle firmly gripped in his gloved hand. He flew from patcher to patcher. Not one of them stood a chance. This was the Benny from the final straw too. This was a creature I recognized. The patchers began shooting at him. When they hit him as he flew overhead, a puff of straw would blow into the air, but it didn't really matter. He was there to reap, and the harvest was ready. Russell, or Benny rather, going with the moniker he seemed to have taken, wielded his sickle for 10 minutes. The patchers didn't run at first. They seemed unable to come to terms with what they were up against. They just kept shooting. They only started to run after it was too late. A few of them broke out of their trance and started to flee. They screamed for their ancestor to save them, but he did not. Benny had no mercy. He flew past a group of 3 and they each fell headless after he passed. He went in circles, taking out any patcher who tried to leave. The final patcher to die in that field was Merle. Benny finished him off with a clean slice. I imagined that Carousel would edit that down into a sleek montage of carnage. Moments after the final patcher fell, I was released from my possession. Pretty much all of my statuses were blaring. It was all I could do to kneel. My entire body ached. Benny flew down in front of me. The slits that had been cut in the scarecrow's head as eye holes were still open, but there was nothing behind them. Just straw. He looked me directly in the eye as best he could with the buttons sewn to the mask. At that moment, I got a flash of images. He was giving me a flashback. I saw a little blonde kid talking to Tamara Kano. I saw her little ponytail holders with the plastic balls. They were walking through the fields toward the special sunflowers. Russell took out a knife, cut off one of the sunflowers, and handed it to Tamara. She smiled and thanked him, and then she said, "My mother loves these." Russell looked at her, confused. "I give them to my mother," Tamara said. "She keeps them on the dining table." Russell looked hurt. He shook his head and then slapped the flower out of her hand. I could feel what he was feeling. He was upset because he wanted Tamara to have the flower, not give it to her mother. He was frustrated that he couldn't explain that. In his frustration, he signaled for Tamara to leave. She didn't understand why, and she started to cry. "What's wrong?" she asked. "What did I do?" But he couldn't answer her. She walked off that day crying, upset, just as Benny Harless had claimed. Then, on her way home, she was struck and killed by Delafield's Patcher. Russell blamed himself. If he hadn't sent her away, she would still be alive. And he would have to live with that. If you could call what he did living. The needle on the plot cycle struck the end not long after that. The others must have made their way to Carousel proper, or at least far enough to get the victory. Benny flew off. I wouldn't see him again until I watched the movie later to see where he had gone. The others had returned with lots of police from the big city, and the B was out in force. Even though the needle was on the end, the movie was still going, just filming some final scenes. A denouement, as it were. We had one. That was all that mattered. Well, not all, because technically, I was still in tremendous pain until the movie was actually over. The sun came up quickly. Carousel was getting it all prepared. I watched the scene later. Benny had gone and grabbed the sunflower and found Dinah, who had apparently been directed to the cemetery where her daughter's final resting place had been dug. Carousel had set the scene in the future. Benny landed next to Dinah and gave her the sunflower. Dinah, confused, simply said, "Thank you." Then Benny flew off into the distance. And finally, it was over. Book 5 Chapter 16 I lay still in the cornfield as I waited for my wounds to disappear. I didn't even notice when it actually happened. My head was laying on my arm, and at some point, I noticed that the fabric of my loud 1970s business suit had turned back into the soft fabric of my hoodie. I got up off the ground as fast as I could. It was daytime, and I hadn't received my rewards, but I still felt like I needed to hurry. We weren't here just to get a couple of tickets or a few coins. We were here to shop for groceries. I started to run back toward the road, but I stopped short and turned in the direction of the farmhouse. Patchers, or at least parts of them, were strewn about to and fro, but I did my best to ignore them. I was looking for something else, a wagon, perhaps. I checked around the shed that we had investigated but found nothing. Luckily, it didn't take too long for me to find a Harless woodpile that stood protected under a small overhang of the roof. Next to it was a thing of beauty, a wheelbarrow. I grabbed it, yanked it from its location, and started wheeling it across the yard. It moved like a dream. It was heavy, solid, and perfect. The painted orange metal hadn't even begun to rust. For a moment, I was tempted to continue searching the sheds and garage for tools that we might need, but at that point, I couldn't afford to waste time window shopping. I didn't know of anything specific to look for, and I didn't know what time limits we had before the story started to reset. I took the wheelbarrow, aimed it at the road, and, with great effort, built up enough speed to get it to the asphalt and continue running with it down the street all the way back to the general store. As I went, I started to see some of the action that the others had gone through after leaving me. There were car wrecks and at least a few fatal accidents where patchers had tested their grit against the little blue motor vehicle the others were riding in. As I walked, I found more patchers and, regrettably, they were moving. Even some of them that shouldn't have been moving were twitch. I heard a moan. I didn't know if that was old country ancestor magic or the storyline resetting in some gruesome way. I didn't stop to check. As I ran, I couldn't help but watch the sequence of my friends trying to escape Easton Carousel. It was utterly dark outside of the car as they drove. Patchers would suddenly pop out of the darkness, shooting at the car or screaming at them, and Dinah had little trouble either helping them off the road or rolling over them altogether. In the final cut of the movie, the revelation explaining everything that had happened was moved to the scene with Kimberly explaining everything to the camera as they drove out of Easton Carousel. It was a tense sequence filled with flashbacks and a few close calls. I nearly ran the wheelbarrow off the road, trying to watch it while running. I didn't have time to watch it closely because I was afraid that if I was too slow, I wouldn't make it in time. I ran that wheelbarrow as fast as I could down the network of gravel and asphalt roads. It would seem I had nothing to worry about because as I pulled the wheelbarrow into the Easton Carousel General Store, the others were just arriving there, too. As soon as he saw me, and one started to smile. "Brought your own wheelbarrow?" he said. "This is what they had to do in the frontier days," I said. There were no shopping carts back then. I stared up at the old country store and grinned ear to ear. That wasn't the type of place I would usually step foot in on a road trip, but to us, it was an oasis. "So, do we have to worry about Corduroy Patcher showing up?" Kimberly asked. "No," I said. I cut him down to size. I tried to make it sound funny, but it still felt weird talking about killing a human, even if it was an evil human. It even felt different than killing one of the body-swapping sorcerers from the strings-attached storyline. Kimberly quickly changed the subject. "All I hope," she said, "is that they still have the fresh produce. I was worried that because of the crop problems, they might not have it." Dinah was messing with the locked door. It took her a few minutes. The funny part was, she wasn't picking the lock, per se, she was just wiggling a bobby pin in the keyhole. After a while, the door swung open. It looked smooth, though, if you didn't know what was going on. "The gun's missing," she said immediately. I pulled it from my hoodie pocket and said, "I've got it right here. Do try to kill me with it." She grabbed it from my hand and examined it. "We're going to need ammo," she said. She walked around to the other side of the register, following some keen instincts. She shuffled through a cabinet back there and pulled out a handful of loose cartridges. "It's a start," she said as she put both the gun and the bullets inside of her purse. Kimberly was looking through the store and said, "Let's get to it." So we did. Canned foods were first. They were the building block of any survival stash. I wasn't sure we were going to need all of the canned fish and mustard sauce, but if we ever did, we would have a ton of it. We also got lots of crackers and staples like flour, sugar, and salt. And one grabbed a few cases of old-fashioned beer and shrugged his shoulders with a smile. Kimberly said, "No. We aren't here for that, and that'll take up too much room." And one put the cases back sheepishly. "I was just playing," he said. Bagging up as much of the fresh produce as we could took a while, and as we did it, I began to reflect on the storyline. "You know, I was thinking that your Veil of Silence drop was going to be huge in a storyline like this," I said. "I couldn't figure out why people weren't coming out of the woodworks to tell us we were in danger, and it turns out it was because all of the people that knew we were in danger were bad guys." I laughed, and they laughed, and then we continued talking. We were exhilarated. Not only had we planned out a run and had it gone basically perfectly, but for the most part, we had gotten through it without any pain at all. How many times had we seen the vets take on vampires or cultists like it was taking out the trash? That was us now. Dinah recounted her time driving through the dark, dodging Patchers. She explained that the headlights only went about 10 feet in front of the car, and then the light just stopped. "It was like a dark ride at Disneyland," she said. "There were a surprising number of things here that were. Even the shoot-and-run sequences seemed almost like a ride. As we got used to playing the game, parts of it really did start to feel like a game. I wished I could show them what I had gone through being possessed by these spirits of the fields and forests, but I was unable to. Maybe a trip to Carousel family video was warranted. What's the worst that could happen? Death?" We continued pillaging. Heavy items could be put in the wheelbarrow, and light items could be packed inside paper sacks for us to carry manually. The car they were driving had stopped working as soon as the movie ended, so it wasn't like we could just load it inside of it, even if we were willing to risk driving through an omen-laden carousel. Before long, we had stripped the shelves of everything edible or even close to tasty. Not all of what we wanted was practical. There was just too much. If we stretched this, it could last us 3 weeks, Kimberly estimated. Of course, if we start rescuing people, I said, that's going to shrink down real quick. That's a problem for another day, she said. We can bring this candy, Ant-Man said, pointing to some ancient-looking taffy and strawberry hard candies. When those start to look appetizing, then we know it's time to go shopping again. I'm pretty sure Carousel has never had to restock those things, I said. That reminds me, Kimberly said, we'll have to buy modern toothpaste. There's no way I'm using something called Dr. Mandora's Vita Paste on my teeth. As we finished sorting through our groceries and deciding how we were going to carry them all, Dinah said, there's someone outside waiting for us. You'll never guess who. Except we didn't have to guess because he was repeating his ordinary phrase, congratulations. You've won a ticket. Just a minute, Ant-Man screamed through the door. Silas, the mechanical showman, didn't take too kindly to that. In the blink of an eye, he appeared inside the store with us. Congratulations. You've won a ticket, he said again. Seeing no reason to put off the inevitable, we each went up, pressed his red button, and received our rewards. I got 1 trop, a couple of coins, and an enemy collectible for Corduroy Patcher. Everyone had taken out a Patcher by the end. Their names weren't important. We all tucked them away. Some trophies weren't meant to be shown around. My trop was an interesting one, just out of shot. Type, rule insight. Archetype. Aspect. Stat used, hustle. Often, stealth and jump scares are a matter of fancy camera work, not agility or shadows. If the camera can't see you, neither can the enemy. When equipped, the player will be able to see where the current active camera is when sneaking near an enemy. If they can stay out of view of that camera, the enemy will not notice them either. Beware, cameras can move. Carousel would rather let you waltz past an enemy than let you get killed when it doesn't have a good shot. Carousel would rather let you waltz past an enemy than let you get killed when it doesn't have a good shot. After I had read that trop, I had to reread it several times. I immediately realized how useful it could be and had to check to see if I had read it correctly. Just because a player was on screen did not mean they were in the actual shot. I had figured that out from watching plenty of storylines and from reviewing the raw footage. One scene probably had 4 or 5 invisible cameras pointed at it from different angles, which meant that being on screen only meant you were captured by one of the cameras. To be able to see which camera was currently active sounded incredible, and I hoped it was as good as it sounded. It was also crazy to confirm that actual discrete cameras were used, even if they were invisible magic ones. My collectible was as expected. Corduroy Patcher. Family Mon. Corduroy Patcher belonged to the Abundant Patcher family, small-town royalty known for their extreme veneration of their forebearers and family loyalty. The Patchers were ruled by their ancestral patriarch from beyond the grave, who demanded absolute loyalty and obedience. Corduroy grew up in a close-knit community where the voices of his ancestors were always nearby. While the benefits of a big family helped him grow his business and have a prosperous life, the demands asked of him sought to forfeit his soul. As a devoted Patcher, he was expected to assist with family affairs in all things, even if it meant covering up murders or committing them himself. Antoine didn't get any tropes. He got a collectible for killing a Patcher like I did, but that was it. He got a few measly coins. No one said anything. He didn't act surprised. It wouldn't be until that night that I found out why. Dinah got a trop and some coins with her collectible. Getaway Driver. Type, Rule Buff. Archetype, Outsider. Aspect, Criminal. Stat used, A chase scene in a horror movie usually involves a masked killer and a sorority girl. Of course, an old-fashioned car chase is still possible. When equipped, the user's hustle will be buffed when driving a vehicle. All passengers in the vehicle are safe from outside forces as long as the chase scene is going and entertaining. Keep it running. Kimberly got more than we could have expected from the storyline. It would seem that her performance had been good enough to be deemed perfect, which meant that Carousel got enough footage to put together a complete, consistent story from her. I thought she would have gotten up from the die-cast, but that story's ending was bonkers, which was my fault. She pressed the button, and Silas recited a poem. You can pick one from 3, what will it be? No matter the choice, no room to rejoice. All 3 can save your skin or tear it off again. The question remains, you must choose your pains. In this game of dread, you can choose well and still be dead. Silas the mechanical showman thought that was very funny. He first spat out a ticket explaining things. You've reached a level where the game starts to get more difficult. Luckily, you are about to get the tools to fight back. Having achieved plot armor 21 and having afterward accomplished the requisite feat of putting forth a perfect performance, you have now unlocked your choice of aspect. Choosing an aspect allows you to decide what type of eye candy you wish to be. Good luck. Immediately afterward, Kimberly jumped back. I see the options, she said. Beauty, socialite, and celebrity. She began reading off the descriptions for the options. As an eye candy, you are the master of obtaining and manipulating attention from many sources. However, whose attention you receive can vary greatly, leading to different paths, the beauty, the socialite, and the celebrity. The choice of aspect will shape your abilities and influence your journey in significant ways. Beauty, this aspect emphasizes the eye candy's allure, charisma, and ability to captivate others. A character embodying this aspect could use their charm and social skills to distract adversaries, win allies, and navigate complex social situations. Their high hustle reflects their ability to stay one step ahead, often being the target in horror films. They also have a high moxie stat, representing their social prowess and charm. Beauty has tropes like black-hearted killer, which debuffs the killer if the user is crying when attacked, and play dumb, which causes enemies to underestimate and possibly spare the user. Socialite, this aspect highlights the eye candy's status, wealth, and worldly experiences. A character embodying this aspect could be a famous socialite, a well-known reporter, or a successful entrepreneur known for their influence, connections, and broad knowledge. Despite their privileged background, they are often quite capable and resourceful. Their high savvy reflects their education, experiences, and understanding of a variety of subjects. Socialite has tropes like meet and greet, which creates situations where important characters will seek out the user, and the agency center, which give the player's character an NPC helper. Celebrity, this aspect underscores the eye candy's popularity with the audience. Yes, the audience. The celebrity treats the player like an actor, and the storylines are like films. Using meta tropes to create hype, fan favoritism, and larger-than-life roles, the celebrity is the most versatile of the eye candy aspects. Using past roles to help their career, the celebrity can specialize in virtually anything. The celebrity has tropes like body double, which allows them to sub in a stunt double when doing dangerous stunts, character actor, which allows them to bring in elements of past performances like fighting ability or a weapons specialty. Choosing your aspect is a crucial decision. It not only determines your abilities but also sets you on a unique path. Whether you're a beauty, a socialite, or a celebrity, your natural magnetism will guide you, but your approach to it will define your journey. Choose wisely. She also received 3 special tropes, similar to the ones I had received. I had chosen Director's Monitor, which gave me access to Deathwatch and let me watch storylines whenever I wanted. Aspect trop choices. The Throes of Obsession. Type, Rule Insight. Archetype, Eye Candy. Aspect, Beauty. Stat used, Moxie. Passion, Emotion, Friendship, Love, Obsession. These are tools that the beauty wields in place of guns and swords. and they are better for it. You have always been magnetic, whether you wanted it or not. High drama and intense passion have swirled around you like a hurricane, and you have deftly survived and thrived within it. Your social abilities are sharp, and your charisma and likability are practiced. They'll come in handy for you in a horror movie. After all, horror is just drama with more teeth. Center of attention, the player will have heightened involvement with all plot threads related to their aspect. As a beauty, center of attention makes story elements related to emotion, friendship, love, hate, passion, anger, or any other strong emotion more prevalent for the character and influential in the story, especially the party phase. You will be strongly involved with the emotional, dramatic, and passionate aspects of the story. Additionally, all tropes that derive power from relationship dynamics will be more powerful. This ticket is granted after the player provides sufficient material for a complete and perfect story to be created following the achievement of plot armor 21. Selecting this ticket aligns you with the beauty aspect. Let's see if beauty really can slay beasts. The pedestal of admiration. Type, rule insight. Archetype, eye candy. Aspect, socialite. Stat used, moxie. You've been everywhere and done everything. You have acquired resources and wealth that have allowed you to accomplish amazing things. Whatever it is you do for a living, you excel at it and have developed fame and a following. Maybe, if you can harness that, you can survive. Center of attention, the player will have heightened involvement with all plot threads related to their aspect. As a socialite, center of attention makes story elements related to information gathering and resource collection more prevalent for the character and influential in the story, especially the party phase. You will be strongly involved with pursuits of knowledge, especially from those individuals in awe of your fame and the resolution of mysteries, as well as general problem solving. Additionally, all tropes that involve information gathering will be more powerful. This ticket is granted after the player provides sufficient material for a complete and perfect story to be created following the achievement of plot armor 21. Selecting this ticket aligns you with the socialite aspect. In horror movies, characters are never just famous. Fame is a tool for influence and investigation. The Hall of Fame. Type, rule insight. Archetype, eye candy. Aspect, celebrity. Stat used, moxie. You aren't a character in this story. You're just playing one. You were cast in this movie because it will put butts in seats. Your face on the poster will drive ticket sales. Maybe you're a teen heartthrob, an infamous heiress, a renowned scientist, a musician, or even a wrestler. Heck, you might be a basketball player cast in a movie with cartoon characters. Whatever the case, what you bring into the storyline as a well-loved celebrity will help your character survive this storyline. Or at least go out with a bang. Center of attention, the player will have heightened involvement with all plot threads related to their aspect. As a celebrity, center of attention makes meta and self-aware or referential elements more prevalent for the character and influential in the story, especially the party phase. You will be strongly involved with the main plot of the story and will get a big, explosive scene to star in. Additionally, all meta tropes that revolve around engagement or input from the audience will be more powerful. This ticket is granted after the player provides sufficient material for a complete and perfect story to be created following the achievement of plot armor 21. Selecting this ticket aligns you with the celebrity aspect. Welcome to Carousel. You're famous here. She passed around her potential tropes, and we started to discuss them. Book 5 Chapter 17. Kimberly looked through the tropes and then stared back up at us, hoping that we would be able to encourage her decision. We had discussed this a long time ago, back when we had nothing but time and the Carousel Atlas to look through. When it came to the eye candy archetype, there were no bad choices. The Atlas made it a point to warn that the beauty aspect required a lot of commitment because the beauty had to juggle a lot of characters and interactions. That made them powerful in ways that might not be obvious. Storylines in Carousel were, well, stories, after all, and it was true that the characters in them often got overshadowed by the plots, dangers, and fear. However, Being able to connect with NPCs and fellow players and use those connections was quite valuable, even if newer players weren't able to appreciate that yet. The socialite aspect was seen as incredibly useful for information gathering and manipulating NPCs in its own ways. Picking that aspect usually resulted in you being cast as some sort of famous person within the story world. From the description, you ended up with a story kind of like Sinister, where the character is a famous author, and other characters all know who he is and either hate him or love him because of it. Socialite also had lots of perk tropes, and as we have learned so far, never underestimate perks. That left the celebrity aspect, one of the hardest to use and most versatile. If Kimberly chose the celebrity aspect, it wouldn't significantly alter which characters she portrayed. However, the treatment of her character in the film would change, as the role would now be played by a famous actress. The benefits of the celebrity aspect were numerous, though not particularly well coordinated for any given strategy. It was a jack of all trades. Even trades you didn't know existed. It required thinking on your feet and a willingness to go out with a bang. When we got here, I thought Kimberly would have chosen beauty or socialite. Those were more straightforward. She had changed a lot in Carousel. She looked at us and said, "Celebrity," as if asking for permission. "It's your choice," Ant-Man said. "We told you this before, we're not going to be upset no matter what you choose." She looked down at the tropes she had been given as options and went back toward Silas, the mechanical showman, and returned 2 of them. Upon doing so, I could see her plaque on the red wallpaper change. She was now a celebrity eye candy. To her, it wasn't just an arbitrary decision. It wasn't even really about the roles or the abilities. To her, picking the more versatile option meant that she could take on more responsibility. With Project Rewind and the deaths of so many people we cared about, none of us wanted to be the person who coasted. After she made her decision, Ant-Man hugged her, and we sort of clapped as we finished gathering up groceries. Then we walked back to Kimberly's loft downtown. Ant-Man was kind enough to push the wheelbarrow. I didn't know if that was out of kindness or out of some apology for his own perceived failures. Why had he gotten no tropes from that storyline? By all rights, he should have. From what I saw, he did great. It was possible that his experience level was just at a particular place where he wasn't close to being awarded another trop, but it seemed more likely that something else was going on. _. "I hope you like it hot," Isaac said as he put a steak onto my plate. It had once been a pristine cut of ribeye. I couldn't tell anymore. I wasn't sure if that was a joke or if he actually did think that torching the steaks was the right way to cook them, but none of us really cared. He seemed genuinely proud. "I was always the cook in our family," he said. Cassie didn't seem to give him grief for it, so I didn't either. We sat on the roof of the loft and watched as the sun moved across the sky. Even though the final straw was not the hardest storyline we ever went through, it felt like one of our biggest accomplishments. Most of the time, we had either been thrust into storylines or chosen them because we didn't want to get X'd, even though I was the only one who knew that would happen. With the final straw, however, we were doing it because we needed to provide and survive. There was something very comforting in making our own choices and succeeding at them. "So you're really not going to tell us what it was about?" Isaac asked after he sat down with his own food. Baked potatoes and steak were our reward. It probably wasn't normal for a rural general store to have fresh meat, but we weren't going to complain. It took a while to get used to eating meat in Carousel and wondering where it came from, but we were past that. "No, we're not going to tell you what it's about," I said, "because you are gonna go run it next time." "You think we can do it?" Cassie asked. She seemed nervous. I thought for a moment and said, "Well, maybe not the very next time, but eventually, you guys are going to go get groceries." There was a lull in the conversation as we ate. "So, have you seen it yet?" Kimberly asked. She was wondering if I had watched the final straw on the red wallpaper yet. "Yep," I said. "You're the star." They cut my lines down by about half. "But at least you're not bitter about it," Isaac said. "I'm just glad I survived," I said. I could see this lingering look in Kimberly's eyes that told me she wasn't really asking about the storyline. She was asking about Antoine. She wanted to know if I had seen what had happened that caused Antoine problems. I hadn't yet. Whatever had happened had been cut from the movie, but when nighttime came, I would get to see the raw footage or at least some of it, and I was betting that Carousel couldn't wait to show me. As night came, I couldn't tell if I was dreading seeing it or excited. I excused myself and retired to my room. On my way downstairs, I ran into Ramona. "We have steak and potatoes up there," I said. "I hope you like them medium well because Isaac thinks that's how they're supposed to be done." Not another awkward silence. "I'll go look," she said. Then she stopped and said, "So, you survived?" "Yep," I said. "And what, we just do that over and over again?" she asked. "That's our life now?" "As long as Carousel allows it," I said. I meant it as a joke, but it came out a bit more grim than intended. After a moment, I added, "Nobody died in this one." "You can't guarantee that, but sometimes you get lucky." I decided not to tell her that my nervous system had been burned out after being possessed by ancient nature spirits. "So what's next?" she asked. It took me a moment, but then I said, "We start the rescues. It'll be good to see some old friends." "I imagine," she said. I knew I was supposed to say something there, but I couldn't figure out quite what, so instead, I just said, "If you ever need to talk, come find me." Then we awkwardly parted, me going downstairs and her heading upstairs. When I got to my room, I lay down on my pitiful little bed and stared up at the ceiling. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw an eagle carrying a skull across the sky out the window. It was funny. The thought that went through my head was, "Oh, cool, an eagle." And then my dailies trap activated. I fast-forwarded through it all. There was a bunch of footage of Patchers quitting what they were doing and rushing out to try to stop us from getting the truth out. Much of that had ended up in the final cut. Or at least parts of it. I kept going back, looking for what Antoine had been up to when he was away from us. Then I found it. I saw Antoine running through the woods near the gorge. This was when we had separated and we had stupidly sent him off alone into the forest. When he arrived to find Benny, actually Russell, killing the Patchers who were digging up Tamara's body, he was more or less okay. The adrenaline had kept him moving, and from the way the footage was shot, it looked like he saw something, like perhaps he was chasing Benny through the woods. As this was raw footage, it was hard to tell. He found the dead and dying Patchers that Benny had left near the burial site before running away. Antoine continued to pursue Benny, realizing that he was headed back toward the Harless property where Kimberly and I were. He ran out of the forest near the campsites by the gorge, then crossed the street to head into the forest that would eventually connect to the Harless property. And then, after he had run far enough to be completely surrounded by trees, he stopped running. He had his gun drawn, and he was in the middle of the action, and then he just abruptly stopped and looked around like he had gotten lost. At that moment, his expression changed, and I could see every bit of the light in his eyes disappear. He just stood and stared into the trees, and that was it. It was full-on dissociation. I lay in my bed and watched footage of Antoine standing still and staring forward for 30 minutes. It wasn't that I watched him that long, he was standing there that long. Just staring forward. I fast-forwarded through it at first, but then I just let it play as I watched in morbid fascination. Antoine froze up on screen in the middle of a chase scene. I couldn't believe it. It only ended when Benny or Russell or whoever returned to him, likely under instruction from the script, drew his sickle and made as if he were about to strike Antoine. But if those were his instructions, he didn't do it. I wasn't sure what I was watching. Benny tilted his head and poked Antoine. Then, in a last-ditch effort to jog him, Benny shoved him. Antoine fell back onto the ground hard. That worked. Antoine dropped his gun but was quickly scrambling for it as Benny returned to his escape. Antoine stood up in pursuit of Benny as if nothing had happened. I didn't want to watch anymore. Finally, I understood. Antoine had frozen up, an obvious symptom of his torture in the straggler forest. Carousel had no choice but to get rid of his character. Writing off a character was fine, but it was probably difficult to do that when that character was in the middle of a chase scene and refused to move. Being written off usually resulted from being a no-show to your next scene. I didn't have any idea what would happen to someone who froze in the middle of one. It had decided to send the killer back to kill him, from what I could tell. I suppose that under normal circumstances, a killer would have slit Ant-Man's throat, and we would have been greeted with his severed head as some sort of grim calling card. That didn't fit the story necessarily, but what else was Carousel going to do? I stopped watching the red wallpaper. I didn't know what to do. We literally had no option but to move forward with Ant-Man as our only fighter. I was going to have a conversation with the others about this, or at least with Kimberly and Ant-Man. We could never put ourselves in a situation where that happened again. I understood that the architects of Project Rewind probably did not understand that Ant-Man's condition would be a consequence of their decision to teach us about secret lore by forcing us into it during the Campfire Anthology. I hoped whoever the insider was, that they were at least regretting their decision now, assuming they were still alive. I got up from my bed and walked back upstairs to the roof. Everyone was still up there. They were playing a game of cards under the light from string lights that were hung around poles. As I arrived, Ant-Man made eye contact with me. He knew that I had seen it, and I could see the shame and embarrassment on his face. I went to the table and sat down. Kimberly looked like she wanted to ask me what I had seen. Ant-Man non-verbally begged me not to tell her. The game went on with the added weight of my new knowledge. I grabbed a drink from the cooler, returned to the table, and said, "Deal me in." Tonight, we were celebrating a victory. Tomorrow, we could discuss what we had lost along the way. Book 5 Chapter 18 Are you sure we can't just call Sal again? Isaac asked. I could tell there was something he was aching to say. He was afraid. Unfortunately, his fear came out in the form of insincere apathy and overt any caution. We just need to ask him the right questions. We already talked to Sal, I said. I am telling you, it is best to just have a good attitude about this sort of thing. If not a good attitude, at least dread things silently. I am telling you, I have a funny feeling that I'm really going to regret this, Isaac said. We should pick a different story. I have the same feeling, I said. About you regretting it. Still, there is no right story. There is only the next one. We had all taken a walk to a small suburb in Western Carousel. There was a community center there, and inside that community center was an omen for a story called The Box Lunch. We had encountered a problem. Ramona was way too low level to compete in the higher level storylines the rest of us were attempting. Isaac was the next lowest level player. Her plot armor was 11, and his was 18. There was a lot of difference between those two levels, in my experience. The problem was everyone had to run a storyline every few weeks. In fact, running them more often was better so that no one got too relaxed. The question was, how were we supposed to send Ramona out on a storyline where she wouldn't just get torn to shreds because of her low plot armor? Our solution was the box lunch. The Carousel Atlas had a list of storylines that were good for low-level players. It wasn't exactly phrased that way, but that was the gist. Storylines didn't scale down to the player's level, but they did scale up to the highest level player, which presented a problem. Most low-level storylines appropriate for Ramona would cease to be appropriate as soon as we added higher-level players to go along with her. Luckily, storylines in Carousel were not scaled one-to-one. Storyline difficulty came in stages that were unique to each storyline. While enemies might scale to the highest level player to ensure that they are engaged, the story overall would usually be in a preset difficulty range. We had experienced some exceptions to that rule, but we didn't expect more of them. Running storylines to avoid the axe was routine. Case in point, the box lunch was a storyline that, according to the Atlas, had a difficulty of about plot armor 15. The difficulty did not jump until you had a player at level 30 enter it. That was a very generous range. It meant we could put Ramona, Cassie, Isaac, Dinah, and Bobby on the team, and they should have no problem beating it without worrying about it scaling up. Ramona had reacted jubilantly to our solution. Which is to say, she had said thanks without making eye contact. I hated to think she blamed us. If she got a few painful deaths thrust upon her, she would definitely be salty. I just hoped we could level her up fast enough that she wouldn't be the target for too long. The problem was that the box lunch was not exactly a desirable story. The Carousel Atlas had not been explicit, but when Kimberly had called her fake Agent Sile, he made it clear to her that if she were to run through that movie, there would be gifs of her floating around the internet that would completely destroy whatever sex appeal she had built up. We interpreted that to mean that it was kind of a gross-out movie. Gross-out beats torture any day. In theory at least. Other than that, it was a perfect storyline. Have I ever told you about how my first death went? I asked. Yes, Isaac said. Have I ever told you that I have a weak stomach? Had we been that stubborn when we started out? Antoine and Anna had been pretty gung-ho about the whole thing, and we didn't really have a chance to have a bad attitude because of it. Now, we didn't have Anna and Antoine was not himself. Still, we trudged onward. Better invest in some grit then, I said. Antoine and Kimberly were off walking by themselves, staying with the group only enough to avoid running into any omens. We had some hard talks ahead of us. It was nice to get everyone else out of the loft for a while so we could discuss things. 2 days, though, Isaac said. This storyline lasts 2 days. That's enough, Cassie said, elbowing him in the arm. I thought men were supposed to be brave for the women. That depends on the men, Isaac said. It also depends on the women. Ramona said nothing in all of this. She had been amenable to discussing strategy and learning the game as best as I could teach it. She was still under a perpetual rain cloud and I couldn't blame her. Luckily, the suburban area where the community center existed was fairly quiet of omens. There were the normal things, like the chunk of sidewalk that was missing, leaving a hole that led so far down we couldn't see the bottom. We were stared at by NPCs and others from every window we walked past, but it was no big deal. When we got to the community center, everything felt normal. Let's go in and look around, I said. Antoine didn't have a lot to say, but he took the cue and walked in front of us with his baseball bat ready to protect us. We walked through the doors and were greeted by a series of tables. On the far side of the room was a cubby cabinet that kids in kindergarten might keep their belongings in, but in this case, it was used for all manner of board games and personal belongings of the people who were visiting the community center. I quickly got an eye on the omen across the room. It was one of those that was difficult to accidentally trigger. Okay, I said. What you're going to do is go search behind the cubby, and you'll find a thermos that looks like it's been there for a while. Just take the thermos and put it up with all the other lunches in that cubby over there, and that's all it will take. That's it, Cassie said. I told you it was simple, I said. Be careful. There are other omens in that cubby. Don't touch anything except for the thermos, I added. I looked around at the newbies to make sure they were paying attention. Does anyone else hear that music box? That's way louder than it should be, Isaac asked. As soon as he did, a loud bang was heard as somewhere the music box closed loudly. That had been an omen. Focus and you'll be fine, I said, looking back toward where the thermos was and glancing at the poster for the storyline. It looked like the cover of a Goosebumps book. They would be fine. They would just have to barf up a few gelatinous monsters first. Kimberly, Antoine, and I made our way out of the community center, leaving the others to run their simple, little, disgusting storyline where no one had to die, and everyone would want mouthwash after. They'll be okay, won't they? Kimberly asked. She had put on a brave face and tried to do her best Adeline impression when prepping them for the run. Newbies begged and pleaded, but at the end of the day, they had to run storylines. Luckily, Dinah and Bobby were willing to help. We continued walking. We weren't heading back to the loft yet. We had another stop that also happened to be in Weston Carousel. We walked in silence. I didn't know if they were expecting me to say something, but I wasn't going to. As soon as Antoine knew I knew of his problem, he told Kimberly everything. He told her that his problem wasn't just being startled in his sleep, which had been a lot of what had manifested so far. His problem went deeper than that. He had completely zoned out while on screen for nearly half an hour. He wasn't trying to play down what had happened. Still, I could see the desperation in his eyes to just let him continue to hide his issues. I was tempted to let him. We couldn't scare the newer players. After we had walked for a while, he started to talk. "All we have to do is stick to storylines that don't take place in a forest," he said, "just until I get things figured out." And that was also the first storyline where we didn't use my nightmare trop. I think that was the real mistake. He had such a charming cadence to his voice. I bet guys like Antoine never got fired, not when they could talk so smoothly. I hoped he was right. In previous storylines, we had kept his mental health problems at bay by using his "you were having a nightmare" trop to help transform his very real traumatic memories into dreamlike echoes that he could work through more easily. No matter what we tried, his trauma re-exerted itself. Part of the problem was that he didn't have enough moxie to use the trop to its full effect. Unfortunately, he couldn't just put all of his points in moxie because he was our fighter. We had ignored the problem for too long. "Antoine," I said, "I've got an idea to fix the problem." "I'm telling you it'll be okay," he said. "I know," I said. "Maybe we should change our rescue plans just for a little bit." He took a few deep breaths before speaking. "I know what you're actually saying," he said. "Look, I got it under control. That was just one time. I'll be fine." "Antoine," Kimberly said softly. I didn't know if he was right, but I had an idea for a solution. "Just hear me out. I think we need a doctor," I said. "It just so happens I know of one who needs rescuing." He met my eye for a moment as we walked. His attitude changed as he considered my motives. "So that's it," he said. "You want to go after the Hughes brother?" I nodded. "I know we were talking about trying to get some easy rescues in, trying to find the lowest level players from the lowest level storylines, but I really think we need to hit the ground running. If we can get a doctor, someone with some psychiatrist tropes, that'll be all the better." "Isaac and Cassie will be happy," Kimberly said. "From the way they talk about Andrew, he was always a positive, calming force in their lives. It might be a good idea to get him." Antoine didn't say anything. That didn't mean that he was done, but I thought he was ready to drop it. As we arrived on the street with the diner, the missing person board loomed in the distance. It was just as massive and overstuffed with missing posters as I remembered. I was relieved to see that it had not been cleared. In the back of my mind, I was always afraid that we would arrive at the rescue board to find that our friends' posters were gone, and that had been too late. When we reached the boards with the hundreds of papers covering them, we stood and stared for a moment. We were always awestruck when we looked at it. "Which ones do we take?" Kimberly asked. The three of us looked at each other for a moment, and then I said, "All of them." We knew that when you took a poster, it would eventually get replaced by the NPC who took care of the board. It couldn't hurt for us to just grab all of the posters. We had planning to do. Kimberly grabbed Anna and Camden, as well as many of our other friends from Camp Dyer as she could. Antoine was tall and able to reach the top of the board, so he just started collecting them hand over fist. I made a beeline for the posters that had Dr. Andrew Hughes and those of his apparent teammates. I stared down at them. They were all in their mid to late 20s in plot armor. They went missing near a power plant. Missing posters didn't tell you what storyline a person died in. They just told you the location of the omen for that storyline. We would have to research and figure out where they were ourselves. We carefully placed the huge stack of missing posters inside one of the kitchen cabinets back at the loft in hopes that they would remain safe. Truthfully, it was difficult to look at them and to know what they represented. The three of us stood around the kitchen table staring down at the remaining 5 posters. "So these are our targets," Antoine said. I nodded. "A soldier, a doctor, a wallflower, an eye candy, and a comedian," I said. "Missing. Name, Michael Brooks. Plot armor, 26. Place last seen, Carousel Power Works Pavilion, April 22, 2022. Occupation, soldier. Reward, $100. Missing. Name, Dr. Andrew Hughes. Plot armor, 28. Place last seen, Carousel Power Works Pavilion, April 22, 2022. Occupation, doctor. Reward, $100. Missing. Name, Lila White. Plot armor, 23. Place last seen, Carousel Power Works Pavilion, April 22, 2022. Occupation, wallflower. Reward, $100. Missing. Name, Avery Lawson. Plot armor, 27. Place last seen, Carousel Power Works Pavilion, April 22, 2022. Occupation, eye candy beauty aspect. Reward, $100. Missing. Name, Logan Mays. Plot armor, 29. Place last seen, Carousel Power Works Pavilion, April 22, 2022. Occupation, comedian cynic aspect. Reward, $100. No final girl, Kimberly observed. And only 5 players. It was rarely lower than that. Most teams did have a final girl, but not all. A soldier tended to balance things out. Of course, there was always the possibility that they did have a final girl, and she had just not lived up to her name, so to speak. I lifted up the Carousel Atlas and placed it on the table. The atlas allowed you to search by geographic region, which was useful because I didn't even know that there was such a thing as the Carousel Power Works Pavilion. I flipped around in the atlas until I found it. It was in southern Carousel, where we rarely went out. Damn, Ant-Man said. It's out of town. We knew what he meant by that. It was way off in the boonies. There would likely be trees and forest just waiting to trigger whatever magical psychological problem he had. I read the atlas closely. There are 8 omens in that area that the atlas has info on, I said. Do we have any way of knowing what levels they are? Ant-Man asked. I shook my head. We can look them up individually and hope that there's information on them, but if not, we're going to have to go check ourselves. A quick flipping back and forth revealed that 7 of the omens had entries in the atlas, but only 3 of those had information about how dangerous the storylines were. High 30s, mid 40s, I said. All 3 we had information on said their plot armor level was out of our league. I doubt it was any of those, given their levels. That narrows it down at least, Ant-Man said. At the end of the day, we were going to have to go there ourselves and do some scouting. Book 5 Chapter 19. Ant-Man put on a big smile this time as we walked along. He was still angling to show how confident he was, but the further we walked south, the more apparent it became that that would be a liability. There were stretches of trees and fields similar to those in eastern Carousel, although there were quite a few more pine trees in this direction. I didn't say anything. I just hoped that if we could find a solution to his problem as fast as possible, we wouldn't have to make any hard decisions. So, we moved forward at a faster pace than normal toward the nearest solution. Dr. Andrew Hughes was likely to have some psychiatrist tropes that would help with diagnosing and fixing whatever glitch had caused Ant-1 to dissociate on screen. I had used this to justify why we would be rescuing Andrew Hughes first instead of searching for some low-level storylines to do rescues in. The truth was a little more complicated than that. We had agreed to go to the poster wall and find the easiest storylines we could use to practice rescues. The logic was sound. Start with the easiest storylines and then work our way up. Another consideration was what to do with the rescued players. If players were very low-level, that meant they would be malleable and more likely to follow our lead. One of the biggest worries we had about rescuing players that we didn't know was that they wouldn't respect us or that they would cause infighting. Low-level players were less likely to be a threat, but I still didn't want to rescue someone I didn't know. At least we knew that Andrew's team had been at Camp Dyer. We didn't know them, but I thought our common experience would lead to cohesion. If they had experienced Camp Dyer, then I was almost certain that they would work toward returning to that level of cohesion and peace. So that's who we were going to rescue, Even though the storyline that had killed them was likely going to be a challenge for us, it was worth investigating. Isn't it really creepy that these players died less than a month before we got here, and no one at Camp Dyer wanted to talk about them? Kimberly asked as she leafed through the missing posters that we had brought along with us. In fact, it was a little creepy. Back before rescue tropes had returned, death was a taboo. I can't blame them, Ant-Man said. What's the point in scaring new players? What indeed? It became apparent that we were headed in the right direction as power lines started to converge and become bigger the further we walked along. There weren't a lot of omens on this road, perhaps because there wasn't a lot of anything. I doubted that it was because Carousel just didn't have enough storylines. It was probably because the emptiness of a dusty back road offers a certain feeling of isolation. The further we went, the more isolated I felt. We were just on a scouting mission. Everything would be fine. As we traveled, the barren fields turned into rocky hills, and the trees grew taller and taller. Now that I think of it, I said, I thought the dam on Dyer's Lake was hydroelectric. Why do we need another power plant? I didn't know how much energy one extra-dimensional town could consume. No sooner had the words left my mouth than we turned a corner on the dirt road winding up the hills and saw the power plant in the distance, jutting off the side of a large mountain. Good question, Ant-Man said. There were giant candy cane-striped smokestacks and lots of barbed wire. Giant buildings large enough to house football stadiums loomed in the distance. Power works. Sure. This was a haven of omens, no doubt. It could act as a power plant, but looking at it, I could see many movies being set there. Because of the large building built into the mountain, it had an industrial look but also a supervillain vibe. Stick to the road, I blurted out instinctively as some feeling in my gut kicked into gear. I was feeling anxious. I kept my head on a swivel, looking for omens, but I didn't find any other than the normal barter omens that existed off in the distance to keep you from running into the woods. We continued down the path. As we walked, we came across a large chain-link fence on the left of the road, but it was not for the power plant. The sign said, Derelict Machinations Incorporated. It was a sort of junkyard, but the items contained within it were not the usual kind of junk. That's a roller coaster, Kimberly said, staring off into the yard. In fact, it was. There was a dismantled roller coaster and an anti-gravity machine ride shaped like a UFO. There were also a bunch of those little machines that you used to be able to find out front of a supermarket, where you could put a quarter in and ride in a rocket ship, if you were 8 years old at least. Is this where they keep all of the rides from the Centennial? Kimberly asked. Maybe, I said. But truthfully, I didn't recognize a whole lot. Something that stood out to me was that all of the rides and other machines in the yard were themed around sci-fi. There were spaceships and battle mechs as well as aircraft and robots. All of it was apparently related to some sort of carnival rides or similar, but I didn't get a close look. Let's stay out of there, I said. Omens are lighting up like the 4th of July. We continued on past the junkyard, the second one we had seen in Carousel. We went on further until, eventually, we found the entrance to the power plant. There was a small shack at the gate with a sign that said, Power Plant Tours $5. We would have considered paying that price, except there was no one there to give our money to. Besides, the gate was open. Suckers. This is as far as we go, right? Ant-Man said as he looked around. I nodded. According to the atlas, no matter which direction we walked from there, we would run right into an omen. This area was called the Pavilion because it was built like some sort of Age of Tomorrow sci-fi proselytizing area for the press to take pictures of when a CEO gave a speech. Carousel was advertising its amazing technology in murals on the walls. It could have been beautiful if it wasn't abandoned. As far as I could tell, all of the buildings were locked and secured, but several paths led into the compound. There's no one around, Kimberly said. If we trigger an omen, there will be, I said. Here, you each take 2, she replied, handing us the missing posters. According to the atlas, we just have to look at the omen, and we'll be able to see if our rescue tropes will work, Ant-Man said. That's the theory, I replied. I only see one, he said after a few moments of concentration. Over there, the loose cable. He pointed in the direction of a set of stairs that would lead to a metal walkway that reminded me of something out of Jurassic Park. The walkway moved out over a large ravine of some sort, but I couldn't say what was inside the ravine because I didn't want to move close enough to look. The loose wire swung gently as if something was hiding there, trying to get our attention. The omen was for a storyline called Apex. It was a very difficult storyline, and my scouting troop told me next to nothing about it. I couldn't even see the poster for it. I'm not getting anything, I said. My rescue troop doesn't seem to be triggering. Mine neither, Kimberly said. Mine does, Ant-Man said. It's a big plaque that says rescue. My rescue troop worked on the premise that the enemy of a storyline where players had been killed would have somehow been filmed themselves doing the evil deed, and then somehow I found those tapes. The enemy would then attack my base, and I would have to survive until morning. Whatever the enemy of the Apex storyline was, it was not the kind that would film itself committing its crimes or care if those tapes got out. Kimberly's rescue troop was for things like serial killers. She would mourn the death of her friends, aka the players we were trying to rescue, and the killer would show up at the funeral. Ant-Man's rescue troop was a little different. He turned the storyline into a race of some kind. Whatever the enemy of the Apex storyline was, it was ready for a race. Where are the other omens? Ant-Man asked. I only see the one. If you didn't have a scouting troop, it could be pretty challenging to find omens, especially to the untrained eye. When we walked into the Final Straw 2 storyline upon first arriving in Carousel, I didn't see the poster on the red wallpaper until the storyline was almost already triggered, and that was with the vets telling us it was there. Look to the left of the Apex omen, I said. Do you see the building with the dirty windows that have a smiley face drawn into the dust of the glass? Yep, Ant-Man said, following my instructions. Oh, Kimberly said. Suddenly, she was able to see that omen, too. All it took was to focus and know what to look for, that plus a few free moments to steer into danger. It was difficult to spot omens working down the street, but we had all the time in the world. That one works for me, Kimberly said. I still can't see it at all, Ant-Man said. It works for me too, I said. But it's really high level. I can't even tell what the title is. That wasn't the only problem. We weren't finding the storyline that Andrews and his team had died in. That was the entire reason we had come. We knew that the posters were supposed to allow us to see which storyline it was when we stared at its omen. We would have to keep looking. Alright, I'm not seeing any more. I'm going to take a few steps forward, I said. I could almost feel them take a gasp of air as I said that. A few more steps later, I looked around at all the empty buildings. Okay, look over there. Do you see that poster that says, "This facility is restricted by Section 14 of the Carousel Health Code"? They stepped forward. That one works for my rescue troop, Ant-Man said. Kimberly shook her head. Doesn't work. Doesn't work for me either, I said. I kept looking around, trying to find the omen that had led to Isaac and Cassie's brother's demise. Finally, I found it. I was holding Andrew Hughes' missing poster and one of his teammates, Michael. As soon as I saw a distant building with graffiti on it, I saw the omen. There it is, I said. I read. That was the title of the storyline. My rescue troop does not work with that storyline, I said. Despite that, I could still see copies of the missing posters in my hands placed on the red wallpaper underneath the poster fridge, which showed some kind of 80s tech control panel. My rescue troop doesn't work with that one, Kimberly said, and I don't see a missing poster on it. Well, my rescue troop does work, Ant-Man said, and I only see one missing poster. That was troublesome because he was holding two. Wait, what? I said. It's what I'm telling you. I've got Logan and Lila, but Logan's poster isn't showing up on the red wallpaper, he said. He handed it over to me. Sure enough, nothing changed on the red wallpaper. I stared more intently until I could finally read the graffiti. Death to scabs. Great. Hand them here, I said, gesturing for them to give me all of the posters. Once they were all in my hands, only one more appeared on the red wallpaper. Lila, Michael, Andrew. They are all here, but these other two, Logan and Avery, don't register. What does that mean? Kimberly asked. It means they got separated, Ant-Man said. I agreed. That was the only logical explanation. It was our understanding that you could rescue as many people as you had posters for. The fact that only 3 showed up in this itch storyline meant that only 3 had died there. The other 2 are in a different storyline, Kimberly said. I shrugged my shoulders and continued looking around. That was the best explanation. It took 15 or so minutes, but I eventually spotted every single omen that the Carousel Atlas told us was in this area. Yet, I never found any storyline that contained Avery or Logan. This doesn't make any sense, Ant-Man said. Their posters say that they died in this area, right? Right, I said, double-checking. So there must be some sort of omen that doesn't show up all the time, he said. Like a mobile omen, like at the bowling alley. That was one explanation. I kept my head on a swivel, looking from omen to omen. Then my eyes caught something. It was not an omen but a road. It was in the forest behind us, and we had passed by it on our way to the power station. I noticed that in the distance, in the deep part of the forest, there was a flat plain where gravel had been run up in a line like it often does at the edge of a dirt road. There's something back there, I said. I almost felt my heart stop beating. A fear rose up that I was familiar with. I don't like it here. Trop didn't just give me information on the red wallpaper. It also made me feel anxious and afraid. In this case, those aspects were a feature, not a bug. It made it easier to spot omens and kept me on high alert. The last time I had felt anxiety this strong was when the black snow had appeared, and the apocalypse had almost killed us all. What is it? Ant-Man said, staring off into the woods, a slight twitch in his eye. Is it an omen? Kimberly asked. No, I said. Yes. Wait, I don't know. I started to back away from the power plant entrance and walked slowly toward the woods we had passed. There was a small field between us and the thick grove of trees. Beyond that was the road I had seen going up the mountain, and yet something in the back of my neck was on edge. Was that my hysteric Trop, or was it something else? After all, my grandmother did have the gift, or so my background Trop said. Slowly, the 3 of us walked toward the woods, and as we walked, I saw something move in the shadows in the distance. Stop, I said. What? Ant-Man asked. Do you see an omen? No, I said. There's no omen there, but I feel an omen. I don't know if that makes any sense. I wasn't used to the feeling of an omen being near without being able to see it on the red wallpaper, yet that's exactly what was happening. Then, an idea dawned on me. I think I know what happened, I said. I think that those other 2 members of Andrew's team did die here, but they didn't die from an omen or in a storyline. Antoine immediately put together what I was saying. There's a monster's lair out there, he said. I didn't have the right tropes to confirm it, but all the facts added up, and my gut loudly sang to me that something dangerous was watching us from those woods. Let's get out of here, I said. We have some research to do. Tobe continued. Thanks for last time.